This is The Global Gambit.
But I think very simply, I want to get straight to it, which is that Trump's rhetoric has seemingly softened. I'm not going to say that suddenly he's going to support Ukraine all out, but he's giving more time by which he wants to sort of draw down support of the US, at least, to Ukraine. The appointment of General Kellogg seems to be interesting as the sort of go-between between the Kremlin and the White House. Can you break down exactly what you see in these changes, or is it not really anything to shout about?
Well, actually, I see a glimmer of hope that Trump will not do what he talked about doing back during the campaign. Now, look, it's not unusual that when people who are elected to high office are faced with actually having to carry out policy and live with consequences, it changes perspective a little bit more than when you were just on the campaign trail and trying to get elected. That's not unusual. And plus, the president-elect and his team will have been getting intelligence updates as we approach the actual inauguration 1 week from today. So I suspect that that's had a sobering effect, but it also, Mr. Trump is going to take office next week with enormous leverage over Vladimir Putin that he did not have 8 years ago or even 4 years ago. Trump comes in, he's going to inherit a U.S. economy that is in very good shape. He's got very, very strong domestic political standing. And most of the nations of NATO and the EU are looking to the United States for some leadership and for direction about Ukraine, or at least they want to know that the U.S. is not going to just back out. So I think they're getting a lot of that. The Russians, on the other hand, are in a much weaker position today than they were a year ago. I mean, not only have they lost hundreds, thousands of casualties, their economy is in terrible shape. The banks and everything are being propped up with a lot of artificial measures, and there's growing discontent inside Russia. Plus, the Russians were unable to save their staunch Syrian ally, Bashar al-Assad, because they're so overstretched themselves in Ukraine. All of these point to a possible scenario where maybe Trump sees he could actually help Ukraine defeat Russia, not because he loves Ukraine, but because he would be seen as the guy that got it done. And it also would send a powerful message of deterrence to China.
So to play devil's advocate for the sake of argument, people who are less, shall we say, supportive of your perspective point to the fact that Russia, at least on the ground, in the tactical level, we're talking about strategic a bit, is the Russians are making gains. They have the momentum, albeit I don't personally think gaining another hay bale and field is the overarching direction of a war, right? What do you say to that? Because, the Ukrainians are struggling at that point, but you think none of that really matters if in the longer term Trump will still come to the support of them because of the state of the Russians.
But you're right. And actually, I would challenge the hypothetical that you or devil's advocate position you just laid out. I mean, I remember 11 months ago being in Munich at the Munich Security Conference when Avdiivka was finally captured by the Russians after months and months and months and many casualties. And people in Munich were walking around, oh my God, Avdiivka has fallen. Well, if you look on a map, Avdiivka is about as far east in Ukraine as you can go. And since then, they have, the Russians have been trying to capture Pokrovsk. It's about 65 kilometers from Avdiivka. They have not been able to do that. So I don't think Russia has momentum at all. I watched video today of golf carts and pickup trucks loaded with Russian soldiers getting blown apart by Ukrainian drones. So I don't see any momentum on the Russian side. They clearly do not have the ability to knock Ukraine out of the war or even to achieve a breakthrough and exploit it the way their grandfathers would have done back in the Second World War. So I think the amount of territory that has been taken by the Russians in this past year, 3,600 square kilometers, okay, that's 60 by 60 kilometers by 60. I mean, that's nothing. at the cost of hundreds of thousands of lives. And that's without the West actually really committing to helping Ukraine win. In the meanwhile, since this counteroffensive back in August, when the Ukrainians went in the Kursk direction, so that's August. So that we're talking about now January, 6 months ago, and the Russians have not been able to eliminate that bridgehead. Yes, of course, they've reduced some of it, but this has created a dilemma for the Kremlin that they can no longer ignore. They there's resources that are being diverted to it. And if you think about negotiations, and Putin and Lavrov both said, wherever we negotiate, what we have is ours. Wherever the lines are, that's where we are. Okay, well, you've got Ukraine occupying part of Kursk. So I think all things together, and finally, by the way, the Biden administration finally is starting to put sanctions on these Russian vessels that are used to export oil and gas to India and China. Finally, I would not want to be in the Russian position in 2025.